Kimberly what?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start by calling roll. And I'm just going to go down my screen. Stogsdill.
Here.
Okay. Delfelder.
Present.
Jay.
Present.
White.
Present.
Need my screen. Shockey.
Here.
Brunin.
Here.
Berger.
Berger's present.
Scott.
Present.
Blanchard.
Present.
And I believe that is all that is on the call. Okay, I'm going to kick it over to Kyle Kobe, and he's got some beginning instructions for the meeting.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to the May 21st, 2021 Building Code Board of Appeals meeting. My name is Kyle Kobe and I'll be facilitating the Zoom video portion of the meeting. Joining me here in the Ad Astra conference room is Amy Miller and nobody else. We will work alongside the chair who's on remote video to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Currently, I have everyone muted so we can talk through the general ground rules for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found in the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. You can also turn your video camera on or off by clicking the video icon in the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, when you are participating in the meeting, please keep your video on. When you are not participating in the meeting, it is okay to turn your video off. You'll still be able to listen to the meeting when your video is off. You'll just have to remember to turn your video back on when you are participating. Turning your video off when you are not participating will help make sure that the active meeting participants can be seen on the screen. In some cases, I may turn someone's video off if they are not actively participating to avoid visual distraction during the meeting. You can always turn your video back on during the meeting. If you are participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Somewhere on your Zoom screen, you will also see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. Commissioners, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Members of city staff must also state their name and title each time they speak. I would also ask that applicants and members of the public identify themselves each time before they speak to ensure that everyone is able to follow along. When public comment is sought on an item, individuals participating via Zoom should use the Raise Your Hand feature. Windows and Mac users can access this feature through the Participants button at the bottom of their screen. Android and iPhone users can access this feature through the More button located at the bottom right corner of their screen. For those calling in by phone, you may dial *9. Individuals will be called upon by name in the order they appear on the meeting host screen. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct you to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each commissioner individually to provide their vote. Staff will then announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. I want to again remind everyone to please mute yourself when you're not speaking. I'll now turn the meeting over to the chair.
And Chair, I just want to make note, this is Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director, that Alan Ballat, a board member, has also joined the meeting and is present.
My name is Mark Stogsdill, chair of the board, and I guess we should get started. I guess we'll start with agenda number 1, which which is on our list today. I think first we need to hear from staff and any report they might
Chairman
have.
Stogsdill, can I have a point of order?
Certainly.
Thank you. I note that from these rules that in fact, we're not a legislative or executive body, but are in fact a judicial body from which Mr. Schwabauer, I hope I pronounced that correctly, sir, only has one recourse, which is to take our decision and appeal it to the district court for Douglas County, Kansas. So I hear the instructions given by the city as far as this being, by motion, as if it's some sort of legislative process. However, we're judicial. So this should not proceed as a move, vote, etc. This should be a separate private deliberation among the board for an opinion, which is then written up and issued with regard to Mr. Schwabauer and the city, the two of them being really kind of the litigants who are in front of us today. So under the rules of 1600s, I think that the burden actually falls on Mr. Schwabauer, who should be given the first opportunity to speak. The city can respond, and then he has a chance to rebut back as an appellant would. So thank you.
Very good. Does staff have any comment on that?
I would need to do some research. So we can take a 10-minute recess.
It's it might be good to have the issue resolved, to know exactly what it is we're processing and how we're going to, proceed.
Right. Again, as a point of order, the city itself is actually a party to this. We don't serve the city. We're not represented by the city. The city doesn't advise us. They are separate and, in fact, in a sense, adversarial, since we sit as a body in judgment of what the city has done or failed to do or done appropriately. So I'm not even sure that it's appropriate that we should be taking advice from them.
Whoa.
Are we not independent?
My understanding was we're a city appointed judicial body, but I don't know the specifics. I'm not an attorney. I have no background in that. So I would have to defer to someone with much more expertise in the areas you're discussing. That's not my area of knowledge. So I don't know what our responsibility or liability is, or in regards to making these choices and decisions. So it's never really come up in the 10 years plus that I've served on and off this board. So
Right.
This is Alan Balot, and I'm a board member. I was also a board member of the Board of Zoning Appeals for more than a decade, maybe more than 2 decades. The Board of Zoning Appeals is definitely a quasi-judicial body, as Mr. Berger is speaking. The protocol, you're correct, is that if we are a quasi-judicial body, the applicant's next course is the district court. However, the practice of the Board of Zoning Appeals is to hear staff's report and then to hear the applicant's report. And that is the correct protocol. I don't think the question of whether we should even be hearing staff's report is correct, based on the Board of Zoning Appeals protocols.
I appreciate those protocols. I think the due process would be contrary to those protocols. And if the city is willing to take on the burden of proof, then I think that might be more appropriate. However, that's not the way that the code is written up. And while I appreciate that the city has always guided its boards in an administrative fashion, if we're going to treat this as a true judicial body, then I think we should treat it as a true judicial body and respect that among ourselves and for those who are going through this process.
I believe we may have an impasse here. I don't know. This is the first time this has ever come up, to my knowledge, that we've had this discussion. So I would defer to city staff to give us some guidance in what direction we need to proceed, because, it's their determination that has brought us all to this meeting in the first place. So.
Chair, Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director. Mr. Ballot is correct that the Building Code Board of Appeals does function in a quasi-judicial manner, very similar to the Board of Zoning Appeals. The action and determination taken by this board on this particular item will need to be written up as findings of fact. There will need to be a motion to that effect. Typically we handle our meetings, even our quasi-judicial meetings, with a presentation from staff, a presentation from the applicant, and then both can rebut. And we also open it up for public comment, and then deliberation by the board. That is the process. If a commissioner is not in agreement with that, and the board so chooses, we can continue the item, recess, and we will need to get city legal staff involved in order to make a determination and schedule a further meeting at a future date.
I don't find that an acceptable solution for the appellant here. So what you're basically saying is, because of a concern of due process, a concern of the burden of proof, concern of the independence of this organization, that you're going to penalize our appellant, who now has to wait an additional period of time until the city decides what to do. I don't find that acceptable. I mean, I'll allow this to go forward, but it's over my, kind of procedural objection then, and just kind of depends on how it all comes across at the end and if both sides are treated fairly.
Okay, this is Mark Stogstill again. I guess I can put it up to a vote with the rest of the board members. Do we want to proceed, or do we want to go back and actually sort this out? So, because obviously we have one individual on the board that has some concerns about the process. So, would that be a reasonable direction to travel? Ms. Miller?
That would. I apologize. We typically don't have our legal staff at all of our meetings. If we had known that this issue was going to arise, we could have done some research and had our city attorney present. So I apologize for that.
So I guess I would look for a motion to just make whether we want to proceed with the objection that we have before us, or postpone or not have this meeting at this time.
I can't get my video on, but this is Alan Ballot. I make the motion that we proceed.
I hear a motion. Do I have a second?
This is Eric J. I'll second.
Ms. Miller, would you like to vote for us, please?
Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director. I'd be happy to call the roll. White?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Chris Berger. I think there's discussion after motion in a second.
You're correct.
Is there any conversation?
Chris Berger, same as previously stated, I don't think it's right for this matter to be delayed any further, but that doesn't pass on procedural or due process deficiencies. Prior to the hearing, I'd asked for a copy of the rules from city staff. Nothing specific was provided as to how this would go forward. And so there's no way for me to know other than at this very moment as to how it was going.
I believe we have a motion and a second. Could we now take a vote?
Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director. White,
Yes.
Blanchard,
Yes.
Delfelder,
Yes.
Brunin,
Yes.
Balot,
Yes, aye.
Jay,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Shockey,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
Stogsdill.
Yes. So we have a motion. I would then assume we were going to proceed as we had originally intended. Could we have a staff report?
Adrian Jones, Senior Plans Examiner. The issue at hand, we received a building permit for a swimming pool. Staff reviewed the plans and provided the applicant with comments. As determined by plan review staff, 2 of the items staff did not feel that were in compliance with the 2018 swimming pool and spa code. The first item was the barrier, the fence, the proposed fence. So to back up, the building code has general requirements. It has specific requirements. And if the code doesn't have specific requirements or general requirements based on the item being reviewed, then the building official is permitted to determine under each administrative section of each code to determine if the proposed project, construction, or method of construction is safe. So you all have, I don't know if you all have my email I sent to the applicant where we discuss in the 2018 pool code section 102.8. What that basically says is, just as I just explained, the fence that's being proposed, the building code cannot cover every specific design. So in the fence barrier requirements of that code, we have requirements for chain link fence, very clear. We have requirements for your typical wood and slat fence, very clear, the size of the openings, the space, the horizontal members, and all of that. But what's proposed, there's no specific requirements for that. So what the building official does at that point is we try to find out what is the intent of the code. One of the tools that we use is the code commentary. When I went to look up the code commentary, it clearly says the intent of the barrier requirement in the swimming pool and spa code is to prevent someone from climbing the fence and getting into a backyard. That is the intent of the barrier requirement. It clearly says that in the commentary. So that was my response back to the applicant, that I did not feel, based on the design, which has horizontal slats, and there's anywhere from 1 inch to 1.5 inch spacing proposed on the fence. Staff determines that's basically a ladder. Someone can get their hands, it's perfect for footholds and handholds. Somebody can get their hand in there and climb the fence. So we thought the barrier was unsafe. That's that portion. The second non-compliant item, we provided the applicant with a very specific requirement, very specific. It requires that if your house is used as a part of the barrier, then every door leading into the backyard or every window sill that's under 48 inches needs to have an audible alarm on it. The applicant's response was he just didn't feel that that was necessary. So that kind of wraps it up. And that's where we are on these two sections of the codes and the plan review comments.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. This is Mark Stogstill again. I guess I would like to hear from the applicant to give their side of the story and explain what their intent is.
Thank you, Mr. Stogstill. My name is Matt Schwabauer, property owner at 2305 Westdale Road. My wife, Katie Hobson, and my daughter, Nora, are on the call as well. I'll start, and if they have anything to add, they're certainly welcome to do that. Thank you for everyone's time here, and particularly the attention to process, particularly Mr. Berger there. It's fascinating. I'd be surprised if we were to take any sort of appeal to the county court, but I guess we'll see. I generally agree with what Adrian, Mr. Jones described as the situation we're at. I would update, we had not finalized our intent on how large those spaces would be between the horizontal slats. And subsequently, we're planning on 3/4 of an inch between the horizontal slats. I think our appeal is largely based on the equal or better language that I believe we have the right to pursue here. I believe a 4-foot tall chain link fence would be allowable per the International Spa and Pool Code. And it's really hard for me to believe that our 6-foot fence would be inferior to that in terms of keeping people from climbing. I believe that sounds like a fair interpretation of the intent of the code and the barrier is to prevent climbing. That sounds very reasonable to me. There are certain limits of what can actually be achieved. The requirement isn't to build a 50-foot fence or to build an electric fence or to keep 100% of high jumpers out of our yard. I believe the intent for safety would be to keep children who are at risk of drowning out of our yard. And I believe our proposed fence is equal or better to other fences specifically allowed. It's worth noting that not only is the chain link fence allowed, but it specifically allows 13/4 inch chain link, and a typical chain link is a 2-inch grid. So not only is chain link allowed at 4 foot tall, but it's allowed sort of an extra large opening chain link. And as a child, I certainly preferred climbing chain link to other fences, certainly easier, I would imagine. So it's hard for me to believe that our proposed fence does not meet the required intent of keeping people from climbing into our yard. Anyone who is capable of climbing a 6-foot fence like this is, in my opinion, certainly going to be large enough and stable enough and capable of not being in danger around a 2-foot deep pool. In regards to the audible alarms, figured I'd throw it in there while we're going through this process. I can't imagine, once again, any person, child or otherwise, being able to climb through the rear windows of our house and expose themselves to any kind of danger. I believe, once again, we're meeting the intent of safety. Our windows are fairly inaccessible. Was happy to put alarms on there for the just to keep it moving. But since we're here, I figure I ought to point out that there ought to be some more open interpretation there as well. The fence would also, in my mind, be more of a deterrent than other fences allowed in terms of keeping a visual off of the pool. An attractive nuisance is, I believe, what this would be considered, and the chain link does nothing to prevent that, whereas this proposed fence will limit the view more of our pool, which would do more to keep people who shouldn't be in the backyard out of the backyard. One more note is that I believe this was interpreted as a solid barrier fence. There's a couple different types of fences spelled out in the International Spa and Building Code, the chain link, a mesh fence, and a horizontal slat fence and a vertical slat fence. And this didn't really fall into any of those. So I believe the city interpreted it as a solid barrier, as if we were building like a masonry wall or a stone wall or some sort of solid structure. And so the feedback from staff was that we could still put in a horizontal slat fence, but we weren't allowed any space between the horizontal slats. And as I mentioned at the beginning, our intent now is a 3/4 inch space between our horizontal slats. And the code specifically points out that if we were to build a brick wall, for example, we would be allowed quote, typical masonry joint sizes in between the bricks, which could be interpreted as larger than 3/4 of an inch that we're asking for our horizontal slats. So I would argue again that our fence would be less climbable and more safe than a brick wall that we would be allowed to build here, and I believe would be allowed to build that at 4 foot tall. Once again, and not be required to put it in at 6. So in my mind, Katie and I and Nora are proposing a fence that is safe, is sufficient, meets the code, and I suppose that's all I have. Katie or Nora are welcome to add anything if they'd like.
I guess the only thing I would add is that this is also a temporary pool designed to be used during the summer and stored in the garage. So I guess I'm just wondering, does that mean that we're going to have to go through this process every single year for something that's not meant to be a permanent structure? It just seems like very cumbersome for the general public who are just trying to have a kiddie pool in the backyard.
And I guess I would add one more thing. Thank you, Katie. That was a good point, is that I believe the code requires us to ask for a permit because this pool could potentially be filled up to 24 inches. It's a 30-inch wall pool that per spec allows you to fill it up 24 inches. And I believe 24 inches is the threshold. So we're really trying to follow the processes here. I would imagine the average person out there might think that a permit isn't even required for such a small process. And there is no permit required, no building permit required for fences. The only reason that we're required to have a permit for the fence is because it's used as a barrier for this 24-inch deep pool.
Chairman Stogsdill, thank you for your comments. I appreciate your time and effort and your frustration in this process. And it is always frustrating to try and interpret the building code. It is an interesting document. So at this time, I would like to open it up for any public comment, if we have any at this time.
And if you are on Zoom and wish to make public comment, you may use the raise the hand feature or turn your video on and give us a little wave. Chair, I can report that there is nobody physically present with us in the room to give public comment. And at this time, we are not seeing anybody on Zoom who wishes to give public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. At this time, I would open to the board members for a conversation and discussion on this topic.
If I can ask a question, Mr. Jones. I think I saw in your email that you were saying that this was an issue that was not specifically covered by the code. Is that right?
That is correct.
And in the email that was part of our packet, the only thing that I saw was the safety issue with regard to toe hold and hand hold. I didn't see anything about the alarm issue. Was that in a different email or correspondence?
Yeah, that was in a different correspondence, and it should have been covered in the appellant's application regarding the alarm.
Okay,
This
did not
is
see that.
This is Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director. Can I please remind everybody to state your name each time you speak? Thank you.
This is Member Berger, I suppose. Were there any other instances in the applicable codes where there was discussion of what would be a permissible gap or space?
Adrian Jones, City of Lawrence. I believe in subsequent conversations and even in the applications for appeal, that was discussed about and about whether we would allow a 1 inch or 3/4 inch. And he believed, the applicant believed that 1 3/4 should have been allowed because that's what's allowed in chain link fence. And so the discussion between the applicant and myself was that the requirements, once again, the requirements for chain link fence are specific and apply only to chain link fences. You can't mix the two codes up. The requirements for solid barriers such as a CMU wall are specific to that code requirement for that type of wall. So you can't kind of cross requirements over like a wood fence, a chain link fence, and a solid brick wall. So that was our discussion. I don't know that I included that. That might have been a phone call. I can't remember, but yeah, there was discussion about the size of the opening. Further part of that discussion was that the important was that can you get a toe hold or a hand hold in the fence? So that was the discussion, Mr. Berger.
Chris Berger, is there any difference in your mind between a 1 3/4 toe hold or hand hold in a chain link fence and one that's on a horizontally slatted fence?
Well, we stick to the very specific requirements. There's really no opinion to it. I mean, they give very specific measurements on chain link fences.
So you don't have an opinion then?
In reference to chain link fences and the size of the opening?
Whether there's a difference between a 1 3/4 inch toe hold or foothold on a chain link fence as opposed to on a horizontally membered fence?
My opinion is that I would look at the very specific requirements of the fence, chain link fence, and not apply that to a slat. So that 1 3/4 requirement or minimum provision does not apply to wood fences. That would be my opinion.
May I ask a quick question? This is White. What is the actual length of the boards width wise? Is that a 6 foot or 8 foot or longer? I didn't see that in specs.
Adrian Jones, City of Lawrence. Mr. White, I don't know if you had the attachment in the package that actually shows the type of fence he's proposing. He's got 3 designs there, and the gap varies.
My question was more what the width of those boards would be, not the gap. My question for that, and I'm not seeing that, maybe I'm not seeing it somewhere, but my question is when the width of that board, as it ages, will start warping, and it's going to open up and create more distance in the gaps. And it's also going to warp either in or out. I've seen that on several horizontal fences in our area. So just a question, if that was even addressed, what the width of those boards were going to be.
Am I allowed to respond here? This is Matt Schwabauer.
I think it's fair that we'll hear from you at this point. Chairman Stocksdale.
Thanks. This is Matt Schwabauer. Our plan is for posts to be 6 foot on center. And the boards currently are planned to be 6 inches or 5.5 milled width by 1 inch thick. And in every other board, the other board would be 2.5 inches or a 1x3 1 inch thick. So those 2 dimensions, 6 foot center post. And the only thing I would add is in the SPA and building code, not only is there the 1 3/4 for horizontal or for chain link fences, but there are 2 types of fences: closely spaced horizontal members and widely spaced horizontal members. They're sort of spelled out specifically, and both of those allow cutouts of 1 3/4 in the fence. So that 1 3/4 dimension shows up in more places than just the chain link.
Thank you.
Chairman Stocksdale, thank you. Do we want to, anyone else have any questions or concerns or comments?
Question, Mr. Schwabauer, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Alan.
Adrian? Is
Yep.
Adrian there?
Yes.
Is the swimming pool and spa code an adopted code, or is it an advisory code?
I believe that is an adopted code.
Because when I check on the city's website, it is not listed.
Yeah, I think, Alan, you may be correct. That may be going to just a second.
Okay.
And maybe Alan, while he's looking that up, you can explain what the difference might mean.
Well, the difference to me is well, I'm not going to give my hand away, but the difference to me is that if we haven't got an adopted code, we are not authorized to enforce it. Okay. You can't make up things and enforce them. You have to have adopted a code. You have to have adopted a policy. So it's free and fair for the public to get access to it and know what the rules are.
Adrian Jones, it is in our amendment, so it's adopted like a standard.
Adrian, how would a citizen not familiar with development codes and such find out that is an adopted code?
It should be listed on our website. I can double check, Alan.
Okay. I'm on the website right now and I don't see it. But I do see a citation for Chapter 16 fences, and it defines a fence in the city code as anything that's greater than 50% dense, I guess. I guess I'm worried that we've got too many codes, and it may not be fair, although the safety issue is of great concern. So.
Chris Berger, if I can ask Mr. Schwabauer. All right. Just, we were, just had a chance to look yesterday at the what I guess a swimming pool code. And there is a section called closely spaced horizontal members. Talking that the vertical portion of those shall not exceed 1 3/4 inches in width. And then where there are decorative cutouts within the vertical members, spacing within the cutout shall not exceed 1 3/4 inches in width. Do you have any understanding of what that means?
My impression is if I put 4x4 posts on whatever that is, 2-inch center, then I would be okay here. But all that would do is keep someone from going through the fence who's larger than 2 inches square or whatever. That spacing of 13/4. I agree. This, I would hope, would have fallen under the closely spaced horizontal member description, but it just doesn't apply with, I can't put posts on 4-inch center here. The 6-foot center is. So
And then there's another section called diagonal members, that when the barrier itself is composed of diagonal members, the maximum opening formed by the diagonal members shall not be greater than 1 3/4 inches, so long as they're no greater than 45 degrees in diagonal.
I gotta tell you, I'm confused by it. I think these two items are like wanting like a lattice fence or something, and they're all driven at this, like you're not allowed to pass a 4-inch diameter ball through the fence, essentially. Or if I were to get like a cattle panel type fence, the members would have to be close, the wires would have to be close enough together, essentially, I think, to keep hands or feet out. It's kind of driving it to keep smaller openings to keep things from passing through, more than about climbing. That's my interpretation. That was Schwabauer.
And I'm okay, thank you.
Chairman Stockstill, does anyone else have any comments or want to address this issue?
This is John Belfelder. I have a question for Adrian. Adrian, what is the permit requirement, the minimum size pool?
You're muted.
Adrian, you're muted right now.
Adrian Jones. John, are you saying what does the permit require? What do you mean by that?
Are you saying all pools in Lawrence are required to follow these guidelines and permitting?
No, that isn't correct. If the pool is deeper than 24 inches, that's when a barrier is required. That's basically it.
So it's 24 inches or more?
Yes.
Or it's okay.
Yeah.
So technically, Mr. Schwabauer is required to pull a permit.
Yes.
And I do concur with him that his pool can only hold 24 inches of water based on the manual that I looked at for Intex pool. The alarms are just notifications that if someone leaves your back door or a window under those alarm requirements, you need to be notified. Those alarms are very inexpensive. You can buy a 4-pack of them on Amazon for $30. And you can comply with the city code by putting those $30 alarms on there. So it's a pretty minimum investment just to make sure a child who may be visiting you or your child that's part of this meeting, you're notified when they've exited your home. I think it's a good safety measure. I'm not sure about the fence. The intent of the fence is just to prevent climbing. I like your fence. Mr. Berger's comment on the warping is obviously a little bit concerning. It would provide bigger gaps down the road. And, nothing says that you won't leave that pool in your backyard and you won't sell your house tomorrow. And the new homeowner that comes in there is, needs to make sure that these safety requirements were met when that pool was put in and you pulled your permit. So I get your thinking today, it's not applicable. However, these codes are put in place for not only you, but for the future homeowner. And homeowners say a lot of things. They say, this is just how I'm going to do it. I'm going to tear it down every year and I'm going to put it away. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Nobody's really going to come back and check. So at this point in time, all measures have to be met to the best of the city's ability. And so my personal opinion on the fence is I agree. There's nothing there that talks about horizontal fencing, just horizontal members on the interior side of the fence, of the pool side of the fence is the only language that I see that covers the horizontal members. I think we could probably come to an agreement for your fence on that gap today. If you were willing to give a little bit on that measurement, I would say 3/4 of an inch would be acceptable, but that's my opinion. I think anything above 3/4 of an inch is not acceptable because a toe could get in there and use that fence to climb. Chain link fences only have, a 4-inch square, a 4 square inch opening in it. So you're not going to get that out of a wood fence. So I guess basically these are just my opinions. Thank you.
Chairman Stokes again. Does anyone else want to chime in on this? Give their thoughts?
Sarah Jane Scott, board member. I had a question on with the normal construction practices for Adrian in the code. Do you have an opinion or any advice on if it doesn't cover specifically horizontal slats, but it covers diagonal? Is there an interpolation between the spacing? If you just, horizontal is not vertical, but it's closer to diagonal.
Yeah. Sarah Jane, I really don't have a thought on that because horizontal and diagonal are different types of things. So I don't think they would be applicable in the same measurement or way.
So on the normal construction practices, if you're putting in horizontal slanting, would it be normal to butt the boards up together and then allow for the shrinkage, or would you gap them and allow for shrinkage?
There is going to be shrinkage, absolutely, and that should be considered at the time of the design. Being around construction, you put in a deck and you start out with an eighth and then you end up with a quarter. I think that's pretty much the type of shrinkage that might occur. And that would be something to consider over time. I have discussed that with our structural inspector, and we are of the same opinion that what you start out with is not going to be over time what you end up with. So that should be considered. Yes.
Chris Berger, Ms. Scott raised a question for me. That diagonal member section says, quote, "The angle of diagonal members shall not be greater than 45 degrees from vertical." does that mean that it can move, has to be, what I'm trying to say, at least 45 degrees and moves toward 90 straight up and down, or it's the opposite way? So you're nodding up and down saying it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. In other words, you go from vertical to almost horizontal and you can't exceed the 45 degrees. So if you go from vertical to 180 or 90, you've exceeded that requirement. And I think the intent on that section of the code is to not have horizontal members that you can climb.
So diagonal members that are 2 degrees would be under the diagonal member section.
Adrian Jones, 2 degrees from vertical, Mr. Berger?
2 degrees from vertical.
Yes, that would be under the diagonal section.
So that would be in terms of nearly vertical.
That's yeah, going from 1, if you do 360 at 12 being 1, 2 degrees would be, 5 degrees off vertical.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
I think it's a little different than the first answer.
Chairman Stoggs, again, any other comments?
This is Mike Vernon. I have a question for Mr. Jones. In the email, you had referenced an ICC commentary saying that a barrier can't have any protrusions or indentations, such as a toe hold or a handhold. I was curious where that came from, because in the International Spa and Swimming Pool Code, the definition of a barrier is listed as a permanent fence, wall, building wall, or combination to completely surround a pool or spa and obstruct the access to the pool or spa. So I was just curious where that commentary section is, where that came from.
That commentary references the barrier requirement for 305, and it just gives basic overall guidance and the intent of the barrier. If you're looking at my email from 4:30.
Okay, and is that found, is the commentary, is that a separate edition of the code or in the end of the code book, or?
No, that's a separate book that you have to buy.
This is Matt Schwabauer. I found the protrusions or indentations in 305.2.3 solid barrier surfaces in the code. Can't use a climbing wall as a barrier.
Chairman Stoggs, again, any other comments?
Chris Berger, just something for Mr. Jones. From your perspective, does the city actually take on any responsibility in its code review for the safety of any resident or homeowner in Kansas?
Our jurisdiction lies, Adrian Jones, our jurisdiction lies strictly for the city of Lawrence. No, yeah.
So is it the city's position then, this is Chris Berger, that it does or doesn't take on any responsibility for safety of residents or homeowners as it's reviewing, approving, or not approving submittals?
Mr. Berger, as a building official, it is the responsibility of plan review and safety staff to determine if a structure is constructed that, yes, it is safe. And so in responsibility, unless we knowingly approve a code violation, then yes, the city should be responsible or is responsible for the safety of that structure. In other words, if, say, for instance, we approved a deck that was way overspanned and it collapsed, then unless we knowingly approved the code violation, I think that, in my opinion, the city would be responsible for that.
This is John Delfelder, Adrian. Um, I'm not a legal a scholar or attorney, but I have seen a few of these city jurisdictions who have authority over our codes. And most of the time, it just comes down, you're providing a level of assurance to the best of your knowledge that, you know, this work is being done correctly. I don't think you'll be held liable. You know, the homeowner ultimately is going to be liable here for anything that happens in his backyard. And I think we're all trying to help him get there. I guess my question is, as a contractor, I've had to come to the city and ask for things that are a little gray in the code and ask for a variance. And sometimes I get an okay, and sometimes I get no. I guess my question on behalf of Mr. Schwabauer and his family, are we willing to make a concession and give him a variance on this fence? And if we are, what is that? What is the threshold that we're willing to accept? And is he willing to accept it? I personally am not willing to make any variance or recommendations against the alarms. They're inexpensive and they're there for a good reason. And I certainly think everybody should be informed when somebody leaves the back of their house and goes into an area where there's a pool, especially when you have children. So I don't think there's any variance there. But I think on the fence, if we can come to an agreement on the variance, this thing could be a slam dunk and we can get out of here. Just my thought.
Mr. Chairman, Adrian Jones, I want to rephrase that last statement. I think I said it backwards, to be honest with you. If the city or city and plan review staff knowingly approves a code violation, then the information I know and understand by that from my experience is that that would be liable. Everybody makes mistakes. So that's, I wanted to clear that up.
Thank you. This is Chair Stogstone. I have to admit, I've learned quite a bit in the last couple of days reviewing this code. This is not one you have used in the past. It's new to me, and I can understand how an individual trying to provide a play space for his child could be very frustrated in this process. So I have some sympathies there. The one thing I keep coming back to that I see in several of these items is a dimension of 1 3/4 of an inch. And it seems that the building officials the code people have decided that is a size or a maximum height that would be allowed under multiple different types of fencing. I do understand that the exact fence he's describing is not described here. It is an interpretation. And I also know part of our responsibility, at least my understanding, is to try and help the city officials to kind of interpret what we would envision the interpretation of the gray area in the code and give our opinions. And so I think that's the part for me that I'm sitting here kind of going, are we going to tell this individual that his fence is just not allowed because it's not of a design that we have standards for? Or are we going to take the information given to us and try and make a rational assumption that there is a dimension that is acceptable to the reasonable safety and security that this would be still maintained to be a barrier? So I would entertain the idea that perhaps if we could all come to a dimension, an agreement in terms of taking into account the shrinking over time, that would be acceptable as a variant from the building code, I'd be willing to have that conversation if anyone would like to go there.
This is Eric J. I got a question for Matt, if possible. Hey, Matt, what material are you thinking the fence is going to be?
Yeah, there is a lumber mill up in Meriden that saws old telephone poles into lumber, and that's the material that we're procuring for this. So it's full dimension 4x4s. It's old pine, I think, well, solidly treated. And then I guess the other dimensions that I already mentioned for the slats or the nominal dimension lumber. So
Because I think there are different levels of shrinkage for different materials. Treated is going to shrink a lot more than dry cedar, or I actually know what material you are talking about if it's coming from Frank's Mill. And that stuff is not going to shrink anything like treated material you're going to buy off the shelf at Home Depot or Menards.
I would agree. I get the impression it's also fairly resistant to warping more than a typical treated board.
And I just my opinion on this, on the fence, is I tend to agree with what John has mentioned. I can't imagine that the fence Matt's proposing at 6 feet tall with a 3/4 inch gap is anywhere as easy to climb as a 4-foot chain link fence. And it's unfortunate there's no exact section of the code that says anything about this type of fence. So I'm on board with approving it with the 3/4 inch gap and the height that's proposed. I don't have a problem with the column or the post spacing. I think that in my mind that's a little irrelevant depending or based on the material you're using. So that I also agree. I don't know that I can waver on the window and door alarms on the back of the house. I think that's a safety feature that's necessary.
Chris Berger, Mr. Jones, is the city just taking a position that it would never find any horizontally slatted fence acceptable?
Adrian Jones, City of Lawrence. No, that would not be the case.
Is there any space between those, Chris Berger, horizontal slats that the city would find acceptable?
Well, Adrian Jones, City of Lawrence, the applicant has proposed 3 different types of fence, and our discussion was that 1 3/4 was not acceptable. There is one fence design there where there's, I don't believe, if you all have the pictures up, I don't believe that you can get a toe hole, but those are so spaced so close together, and the applicant wanted at least 1 3/4 inches, is my understanding. And if you look at his paperwork, he said he would go down 1 inch. My personal opinion is 1 inch is still too much. I mean, I get my hands in an inch opening very easily. And someone with smaller hands and smaller feet could. So we had kind of going back and forth on that measurement and hadn't come down to an agreement because the applicant had not proposed a very specific design. So we were working with that. So he's got 3 pictures up there. So, there is something, my personal opinion, and I think in discussion with plan review staff, 1/2 inch might be acceptable, but I don't believe the applicant wants to go down that far.
Chris Berger, in your review and comment process, could you comment back when you're reviewing documents with what would be acceptable in the future, as opposed to simply saying no?
It's the plan reviewer's responsibility is not to design something for them to submit. They submit it, propose it, we review it, and give give responses back.
This is Matt Schwabauer. May I say something? Okay, I'm assuming yes. When we were submitting this, we did include a sketch in addition to the photos that Mr. Jones has referenced. I wasn't expecting this process. I was sort of expecting an approval based on a concept design and call this sort of paperwork and construction all trying to meet a warm season schedule to let Nora get out in that pool. So we hadn't finalized our concept. When I asked for 1 3/4, I was trying to protect what I believe and still believe would be my entitlement, based on what someone pointed out, is that the 1 3/4 number shows up all over this place for very specific types of fences. So I still believe that that is an entitlement that should be allowed for horizontal slat fences. I could get on board with this body interpreting that differently. And our latest objective is to have a 3/4 space based on the aesthetic we're going for, and believing that would be a safe dimension as well. While I'm speaking, I will just speak to the alarm as well. I appreciate the point that Mr. Delfelder made and Mr. J, regarding safety, and I do understand that the alarms are a safety feature, and particularly on the door, that makes sense. On the windows, they seem onerous. I think my biggest concern here with a lot of these things is when we set up rules that then are so onerous that they're difficult to follow. If I have to disable this alarm every time I want to open or close one of my windows, a homeowner, myself, or a future homeowner would tend to disable these or not want to turn them back on. If something were to happen, and someone was hurt and there were some sort of lawsuit or an insurance company or whatever, if there were a rule in place that weren't followed because it was onerous, but it was in place because it was a rule, that would be liability on us. It puts, I believe, an undue burden on us. I could get on board with an alarm on the door. That makes sense. No one's going to climb through our windows. I think the code is really unfair here in that it points out that any window with a sill less than 48 inches needs an alarm. There's no one who's going to drown in this pool is going to be able to open this window or climb through this window. There's nothing very specific about it. So, once again, the code can't probably speak to every specific window in the world, but it's just a point of concern for me that we're being asked to put something in on day one that just isn't very realistic, and it essentially exposes us, I believe, to liability if we don't follow this sort of very, very rigorous safety rule. Thanks.
I think my only addition to that comment, this is Katie Hobson, one of the homeowners, is, we've tried to do the right thing through this whole process. We started off by calling our insurance agency to find out what the rules were around pools and liability. And quite honestly, they said, if it has water in it and it's a pool and you need a fence, go to your city to talk about the building code. And so that's where this process started. And there was no discussion about alarms on our doors. We are in and out of our doors frequently all day. I can't imagine what that will be like to have alarms going off all day long. So I understand wanting safety issues here. We're even going to have a pool cover. I'm not sure exactly how it attaches yet, but we're not trying to be unsafe. We are really trying to follow the rules here and create a barrier that is very clearly from the get-go saying, this is our yard. This is not a place you're allowed to come into, and trying to be safe in our neighborhood. So.
This is Laura Blanchard here. There's a couple of things I wanted to bring up. First of all, the alarms on the doors can be tied into your house security system. And it just dings and tells you if the door's been open. And then you can also, it's not if the window's been open, it's usually if the screen's been taken out. That's when it would alarm. I have teenage boys, so their windows that are down below have alarms on them for if screens are taken out. 2, the structural integrity of the pool that you bought is only designed to hold 24 inches of water, not over 24 inches. And the code applies for pools over 24 inches, from my understanding. Another item is that my husband, who's an architect and was a contractor for a while, built one of these horizontal type fences around underneath our sunroom, raised sunroom. And so I had the neighborhood young boys come over, and there's probably about 3/4 to an inch gap between the cedar planks. And yes, it's only about 5 feet tall, but I was trying to have them climb. I had them take their shoes off. With socks, it was impossible. You know, even with bare toes, they really, really struggled, and they could never get all the way up to the top. So that made me a little more comfortable with this option. What you have done is try to follow the code and do it the right way, and we do appreciate that. I'm kind of like everyone else here. The alarm system, I think, is important, just in case. You can even get like a ring type system to notify you for movement out there. But yeah, I think you've met since it's not clearly defined in the code on this type of fence design, in my personal opinion, I think that you've met the intent of safety.
Chris Berger, Chairman Stogsdill, is this our deliberation time?
Chairman Stogsdill, I believe we're at that point where we need to either have a motion or some kind of suggestion in terms of where we want to move forward with. So I would entertain a motion.
Adrian Jones, Chairman. So one of the things that I think is important is that we leave this meeting with some clear guidelines. So if as Ms. Blanchard said, if she feels, and they obviously did have a climbing contest, that 3/4 of an inch is acceptable, and the board wants to provide that guidance, or whether they think 1 inch or 1 3/4 inch is acceptable. The point is, we want to come away from the meeting with a definite set of limitations for this particular fence. So that would be my point.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Would anybody want to entertain a motion in terms of a maximum width that they would be comfortable with supporting as a variance on this project?
This is more.
Please, Mr. White.
Yeah, I would agree that I think 3/4, in my opinion, would be a good reference that would allow for a little additional shrinkage. I know Matt had said this is coming from a sawmill, which is great. There's probably not a lot of shrinkage in that, but we don't know what someone else would be purchasing for another home in another part of the city. So that would be, something we'd have to take a look at. I would feel comfortable with 3/4 of an inch. There again, maybe this is just my ignorance with construction, but the longer the board is, the more warpage you're going to see in the board, which gives more of a handhold, more place for footing. So I think that has to come into play too. I like, Matt, what you said on the 6 foot. That made me feel a little more comfortable because there's not as much board to move quite as far. So, and just like John and Eric, and even Laura, I'm totally against any not putting the alarms on. I think that's a very important part. Windows and doors.
This is John Delfelder. I just would like to make one additional comment. And I see where Mr. Schwabar is going. He'd like to architecturally have something a little bit more in this fence than most fences. Would there, what is the thoughts or the maximum threshold that you guys would you think would be allowable if he did want to have some at 1.25 inches and some at 3/4 of an inch? You know, no more than 24 inches, because that would be a big step if somebody was trying to get to the next 1 inch. But that might give, you know, we could meet in the middle here. He could have some at a maximum of 1.25 inches and the others at 3/4, as long as they were less than that they were more than 24 inches apart, so he could play with those dimensions on his fence and kind of give it some architectural flexibility. Just a thought.
Mr. Chairman, Adrian Jones, City of Lawrence. That's kind of too open-ended, Mr. Dalefelter, because that's like, you know, there's no way to regulate it, you know, whether you got 1.25 inches, 3/4, 1.5 inches, spaced 2 feet apart or something like that. And that wouldn't be the guidance I would be looking for, or the city staff would be looking for.
Chris Berger, come at it from a slightly different tune. I don't think that the city or this board has, you know, a legal responsibility with regard to dictating things of this minute nature. That there is no obligation on behalf of the city for safety or liability for review or non-review. That we should just follow the general theme that's found within this code that seems to really fixate on 1 3/4 inches. We are not obligated to guarantee safety. We're not obligated to ensure that no one is ever harmed. People will be injured, children. It happens every single day. And I think we should reward property owners who are looking for an aesthetic that is greater than a 4-foot chain link fence, which is far easier to climb than any horizontally slatted fence, whether it be even 6 inches between the boards. So the harmony here is 1 3/4 inch, that we would interpret the horizontal members to be whether those boards are on the inside toward the pool or outside toward the street. And on the alarms, I don't think the city has any right to be telling what's going on inside the buildings and the residences of our citizens. So that's an improper intrusion in my book, and I would not support that, even if it's well intended. That's just a threshold I'm literally not willing to cross.
Okay, this is Chairman Stogsdill. I was thinking that there was kind of a leaning towards a nominal dimension that we could pretty much have a vote on, but I have not heard a consensus yet. So again, if it's 1 3/4 inches, if it's 1 inch maximum, if it's 3/4 of an inch, I think if we would like to move forward on this and allow this family to build this barrier, then I think we need to make a decision, or, you know, he can't move forward.
This is John Delfelder. Mr. Schwabauer, are you willing to make any concessions at all?
Yeah, this is Matt Schwabauer. For our fence, we intend to build it at 3/4. And we would be happy with that decision. I think to Mr. Berger's point, I believe he just made it the 1 3/4 is all over that document. And, you know, part of our interest in being here is to, you know, help help the person who comes behind us, and also to help Mr. Jones here so that he has clear guidance that he can offer the citizens of Lawrence. So, I would suggest, as just a citizen of Lawrence, that you follow the 1 3/4. But personally, we are comfortable proceeding with 3/4. We're really anxious to get a fence built.
Okay, then I say we proceed with the recommendation of 3/4 of an inch gap horizontally. All other conditions with the fencing code remains applicable as it's written, and the alarm will be required. Mr. Stogsdale?
Chairman Stogsdill here. Point of order, do we need a second, and do we need to take a vote? I mean, this is a guidance we're giving back, or a document we're giving back to city. So what do you need from us?
Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director. Yes, you will need a motion. You can use the agenda item that is in iCompass as a guide for what that may look like. And within that motion, you can also specify the 3/4 of an inch in there.
Thank you, Chairman Stogsdill here. So I guess we could work with John Delfelder's motion, and if we could get a second, could add that dimension to the.
Mark, this is Jan Shockey.
Go ahead.
I think we should separate the two items, and I would say we would have the motion for the 3/4 and then have a separate vote on the security issue.
That, if this is Chairman Stogsdill, that's acceptable to me. Those are the two items that are questioned here. So if I get a second on either one of those motions.
Chris Berger, a question for Mr. Delfelder. Is the intention on the 3/4 specifically with regard to Mr. Schwabauer's appeal, or as future instruction for the city, or both?
I'll let the city determine that. But at this point in time, Mr. Schwabauer is seeking clarification and a variant to the way the code is being interpreted. So if the city wants to add language to the code via their amendments, that's up to them and their code review board.
I stated a little differently, Chris Berger, is it the intention that it be no more than 3/4 or at least 3/4? Meaning it's approved for Mr. Schwabauer for 3/4, but the future direction toward the city is shall not exceed, or is at least 3/4 is okay?
I'm just speaking on behalf of this appeal. And I would say for what we're talking about today, it'd be a maximum of 3/4 of an inch.
Chairman Stogsdale, Adrian Jones, City of Lawrence. John was on the right track there. If we want to, at some point, maybe in the next round of adoptions or accept a policy or something like that, that for horizontal members and make a code amendment, say the maximum spacing would be 3/4. So that would be handled separately, and any decision coming out of the board for this particular meeting would only apply to this appellant.
Thank you for that clarification. This is Chairman Stogsdill.
I would second the 3/4 approval for Mr. Schwabauer.
We have a motion and a second on the dimension of the gap or the spacing between the fence boards. I guess we could call for a vote on that item.
Yes. White,
Yes.
Blanchard,
Yes.
Delfelder,
Yes.
Brunin,
Yes.
Palat,
No, and let me explain why. I'm on the city's website. It lists 9 different codes, and it specifically lists links to fences and to swimming pools. I cannot find anything in the listed city codes that a normal person could find to find a regulation that we have been spending the last hour to discuss. I think staff is doing the right thing. They are looking out for public safety, but I can't vote for something that is not a rule or a regulation. And at this time, I'm not convinced that we have adopted this. So that's the cause for my nay vote.
Adrian Jones, City of Lawrence. We have been proceeding on the assumption that this code has been adopted. I'm looking at information from our former building official. And I can tell you very often, Alan, websites don't get updated like they should. When we adopted this was part of an appendix in the back of the 2015 IRC, and it was moved to we adopted the full swimming code. And my first thought is that this just did not get updated on the website. I don't know how to assure you of that, but or whether I'm wrong or not. So we're looking into that very closely right about now.
Adrian, I'm not assailing your veracity and protecting the public safe and healthy. Hell, you know what I think. If it's a code, I'll abide by it. If I can find it and it's adopted, I'll abide by it. If I can't find it, then a person that isn't dealing with codes on a regular basis for sure can't find it. And I think that we owe that to the public. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the only reason I'm recording that vote.
John Delfelder, just real quick, Alan, and if you go to the City of Lawrence and you pull up swimming pool building permit requirements, there's no mystery about this fence. So it is out there.
No, I'm not saying that about the fence. I'm just saying that you're making your reference to the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code for your interpretation. And I am not convinced that code has been adopted. I'm not saying it hasn't been adopted, but it isn't on the city's website.
Chris Berger, I know Mrs. Blanchard had previously commented on whether it was applicable at all to this setting. Did you have any further comment on that or observation?
I just want to remind the board that we are in the middle of a roll call vote.
I'd like to go back to the rule of order also. This is actually a judicial body. We should be having these deliberations in private. So I think we can actually have free conversation.
Chris, this is Laura Blanchard. I did not have anything further to say about that.
This is A.B. Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director. I will continue with the roll call vote. Jay? Jay, can you unmute yourself and try again?
Yes.
Thank you. Scott?
Yes.
Shockey?
Yes.
Berger?
No.
Stogsdill?
Yes.
The motion carries 7-2.
Thank you very much. I guess the next item is, if we're taking these separately, would be the safety of the electrical sound devices and whether that should be enforced in this case. It is in the code, but there seems to be some question whether that is an applicable code at this point, but I think that's another discussion for another time. So if we would like to have a motion that we would require alarms on the windows and doors on this project, I would entertain that at this time.
Chris Berger, my apologies. I was not prepared for that particular issue. I know it's in his appeal notice. Just for quick answer, is this specifically required by code expressly?
This is Chairman Stockstill. It is listed actually in this code section. Mr. Jones could probably quote it to you, but structure 305.4. And it specifically calls out the 48-inch high windows and the rest of the requirements that were listed per Jones's comments.
Okay. I don't think we have any discretion to, since it's clear and it's part of a code and assuming it's been adopted, I don't think it's within our jurisdiction to make an exception to it.
This is Chairman Stockstill. I tend to agree with you on that point. So this is new to me. So are we all in agreement that we will let that stand as is, as part of it? We have no need or desire to modify that in this case?
I don't think we have any authority. Chris Berger, I don't think we have any authority to do so under our scope of authority.
Hearing no other comments, I would suggest to staff that we have the perspective that we cannot or will require that alarm portion of the variance to be enforced.
Adrian Jones, Mr. Chairman, that was part of the appellant's request, so I think it's my opinion that we need to make a vote on that. I may be wrong, but it sounds like you just need to make a roll call motion and go from there.
Okay, this is Chairman Sogsdale. At this time, I would like to schedule or to do a vote on that particular item to verify for the appellant.
Chris Berger, I would move that it appears that the provisions of the city code definitively cover this subject and that we don't have the authority in this instance to grant a deviation.
Do we have a second, Chairman Stogsdill?
This is Laura
John
Blank.
Delfelder. Sorry, Laura, go ahead.
I second the motion.
If we could call a roll call vote.
Yes. White,
Yes.
Blanchard,
Yes.
Delfelder,
Yes.
Brunin,
Yes.
Balot,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Shockey,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
Stogsdill.
Yes.
Motion carries 10-0.
This is Chairman Stogsdill. I think that pretty well covers the items that we were supposed to review today. So if anyone has any last comments, I would entertain those at this time.
This is Chris Berger. I just really want to thank Mr. Schwabauer, Mrs. Hobson. They've done the right thing. They've they've sort of been penalized for it. That's a shame. That's our regulatory life that we live in. They've been very courteous, very patient, very impressive in the manner in which they've gone forward and respected the system, they've honored it. And I just thank them for engaging. Thank you.
Let's not forget staff's involvement in looking out for the public safety of the city at large.
All right.
And I would also like to thank all the members of the board that showed up for this very insightful meeting we've had today. Thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
White and Scott.
We have a motion to adjourn and second. Could I get a vote?
Yep. White,
Yes.
Blanchard,
Yes.
Delfelder,
Yes.
Brunin,
Yes.
Balat,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Shockey,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
Stogsdill.
Yes. Thank you all.